Welcome back. Well, earlier this summer, I went to Kurdistan, the semi-autonomous region in northern Iraq. Kurdish being an ethnicity, of course. There are most Kurds are Muslims, but there are also Christian Kurds. And I even met someone there who claimed he was a Jewish Kurd, which surprised me. We went there in the run-up to the Kurdish referendum on independence that happened just this week. And the poll results are in. 92% of people who participated in the referendum voted for independence. Some Arabs did not participate in a boycotting way, but Masoud Barzani has declared himself president and is just waiting for the world to acknowledge his state. Will they do it? What does America want to do? What does the rest of Iraq say? What do Iraq's angry neighbors like Turkey and Iran have to say? Well, joining us now is a man who knows better than most. His name is Dr. Michael Rubin. He's a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's the author of the book, Kurdistan Rising. Great to see you again, Dr. Rubin.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be with you, Ezra.
You know, I enjoyed my time in Kurdistan as much as I suppose I could. I mean, it was literally a war zone. While we were there, the final push to liberate Mosul was going on. But despite the fact that we were in a war zone and had to travel with armed security, you could see green shoots of new life, economic life, development. There's a construction boom in Erbil, at least. Kurds from around the world were flying in on the same plane we are to start to build what they thought was a new country. The United States is building a massive new compound. I guess it's called a consulate now. Maybe it'll be an embassy. Huge bases there. Is Kurdistan going to be independent, or will this be strangled in its crib?
You know, someday I think it's inevitable that Kurdistan will become independent, but I'm not sure that time is actually now. First of all, a lot of what we see with regard to Kurdistan is actually a bit of an illusion. There is a building boom, but 80% of the high-rises are actually vacant because Kurds have nothing else to really invest their money in rather than property, but they don't really have the economy that's able to fill it. But the key thing is the neighborhood. The Kurds like to talk about the prospects of Kurdish independence in terms of Czechoslovakia breaking apart into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. But, you know, Iran, Turkey, Iraq, they're not Czechoslovakia. And they're not so sanguine about Kurdish independence. And so it doesn't actually seem like Kurdistan is going to be able to make good on its desires.
Well, I can understand why Turkey doesn't want this, because if Kurdish nationalism is revived or inflamed, there's Kurdish regions of Turkey that might want to break away and join it. And there may be a similar argument in Iran, and they have designs on parts of Iraq. But how about the official leadership of Iraq itself? Obviously, they don't want Iraq to be broken up. No country would want that. But what can they do to stop it? I mean, will there be an arrest of Masoud Barzani? Will there be a military occupation of Kurdistan? I guess what I'm saying is Kurdistan says it's independent. Is anyone going to stop that in reality?
Well, the answer to that is actually yes. Now, I do think that Iraq, of all the countries you've mentioned, Turkey and Iran being the others, would at some point be willing for Kurdistan to break away. The mistake Masoud Barzani made was including in the referendum not just the recognized portions of Iraqi Kurdistan, but disputed areas. And you yourself referred to how many Arabs, for example, didn't vote in the referendum. For that matter, many Christians didn't as well. Many Yazidis didn't because they resent the Kurdistan regional government. One of the interesting factors is, of course, back in 2005, there was another referendum where 99% of the people voted in favor of independence. But in Sulaymaniyah, you had 200,000 less people vote this time around than back in 2005, which suggests declining support, at least in some areas. Now, if it weren't for those disputed areas, I think most Iraqis are pretty sanguine with the idea of Kurdistan breaking away. Now, there's some dangerous precedents here because the Yazidis don't want to be part of either Baghdad or Iraqi Kurdistan. They take an attitude, pox on both your houses.
Yeah.
Well, Deputy Prime Minister Kubat Talabani said it's the natural right to have a referendum. So how's the Kurdistan regional government going to react when the Christians want to have their referendum to establish their own state, or the Yazidis do? But the real problem with Kurdistan is that it's landlocked. They say they have oil. None of the top 20 oil or gas producers in the world is actually landlocked, and so they are very susceptible to a blockade.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is right now I understand they're selling some of their oil through Turkey, and there's sort of a tense relationship in some ways. Turkey has been opposed to this. America has opposed this referendum. Canada has quietly opposed it. I understand that two other powers in the region, or that have interest in the region, Russia and Israel, are in some ways supportive. Why would Russia and Israel support an independent Kurdistan where Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and America be against it? What's their angle?
Well, let's first understand the American angle. Officially is we don't want to disrupt the fight against the Islamic State. Unofficially, it's that we fear regional instability. Now, Israel, there's an emotional case with regard to the Kurds. And what's actually interesting today is the Palestinians came out against the Kurdish right to independence, which seems to undercut the Palestinians' own arguments in favor of their separation and their independence. But let's put that aside for a second. I would argue that it's highly irresponsible for Israel to offer the support unless they're really willing to offer it. I mean, are they willing to arm the Kurds? If the Iranians or the Turks come in to try to crush this, are the Israelis going to supply with military goods or direct intervention the rescue of the Kurds? If not, they're sort of encouraging them to jump off the cliff. And to me, there's something a little bit immoral about that. With regard to Russia, look, immorality is the basis of Russian policy. They're just trying to have it both ways because on one hand, they make this huge announcement that they support Kurdish independence, but the little asterisk underneath it is that so long as it's negotiated with Baghdad, and that's the United States position as well.
Yeah. Let me ask you one last question, because when we went to Iraq, we went very independently. We aimed our cameras at whatever we wanted. We said whatever we wanted when we were in northern Iraq and Kurdistan. That said, we were there with the blessing of the Kurdish government run by Masoud Barzani, and you could see the subtle and sometimes not so subtle propagandization of our people in support of the referendum. And I have to say that my instinct was to support Kurdish independence. I don't think they needed to twist my arm on that, but it was clear they were trying to sell us on this. And I guess what made me feel this way, and Dr. Rubin, I'd like your response to this. Look, I'm a layman. I'd never been there before. I was only there for a week. And although I felt we had freedom, maybe we didn't see everything there was to see in a week. But I felt like at least the Kurds were fighting against ISIS terrorists. They were fighting, at least it seemed, to allow the Christian Iraqis to regain their homes in the Nineveh Plain in a variety of towns that were liberated. I met Peshmerga Muslim Kurdish generals who had lost men liberating Christian towns. I met lots of Christians who said Barzani's going to keep us safe. So part of me was sympathetic to the Kurdish independence just because they seemed like the least worst place in the region to be a Christian or maybe even to be a Jew. It just felt the most secular, the most Western. We saw women who were not covered. We saw liquor stores that were not smashed up. So part of me thought, well, if this is Kurdistan, whatever its problems, it's better than the rest of the region.
Well, when it comes to fighting the Islamic State, actually, or hosting refugees from the Islamic State, there's actually been, I'd argue, more progress in the rest of Iraq than in Kurdistan. When it looked like the Islamic State was going to overrun Erbil, many of Barzani's top generals and their families got on civilian flights to fly to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Jordan. They were the ones that left the Yazidis at the mercy of the Islamic State and turned down the Yazidis' request for weapons to defend themselves. Ditto with some of the Christians. To date, Masoud Barzani, who, by the way, his term in office expired 2 years ago, refuses to release the manifest of those civilian planes. That said, yes, people can drink. Generally, there is freedom of religion so long as you recognize that Masoud Barzani is, in effect, equal to God. And that's the big red line there, and that's why so many people chafe under his rule. In some ways, it reminds me of pre-Civil War Syria, in which you did have some degree of religious freedom. You had a strong man that put the lid, kept the lid on the pressure cooker. But, some of this talk about Kurdistan being a democracy or truly tolerant, you just need to talk about to some of the independent journalists for that, some of the people who have raised questions about nepotism or corruption only to have their family members slaughtered in response. Kurdistan has its problems, but that's not a reason. Poor leadership isn't a reason to deny them their freedom.
Well, it's a very complicated place, a very dangerous place, and a place where there is schemes and scams and plans and intrigues. I felt like I was when I went to Erbil, it was an amazing city, both modern and ancient. The citadel is a fascinating place. This is a view from the top of the citadel. This is footage that we ourselves took. You can see some women uncovered and some with hijabs. It was quite a mix. I felt like I was in a place that could be the setting for a Jason Bourne film. I mean, I felt like half the people there were spies, spying on spies.
That's right. It already is a setting for a Jason Bourne film.
Yeah,
I mean, already half the people you're seeing are spies.
Yeah, well, I do know one thing, is that the Yazidis and the Christians have had the short end of the stick there, those who weren't murdered or raped. We met many of them in refugee camps, and that's why we had our project to provide humanitarian relief. I don't know the answer. You're obviously a thoughtful scholar on the subject, and you have a lot of alarm bells about Masoud Barzani, and I don't dispute any of them. I just hope that troubled part of the world finds some path to peace and safety, especially for those most picked on minorities, the Christians, the most. Thanks for giving your wisdom. I hope to keep in touch with you on this if there's any more developments.
Anytime. I love talking with you, Ezra.
Well, thank you very much. That's Dr. Michael Rubin, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, author of Kurdistan Rising. Some thoughtful counterpoints to my, I guess I've been a bit of a cheerleader for Kurdistani independence. It's a tough part of the world, and I don't know if there's an easy solution, but I hope they find some peace and security. Hey, if you like that, sign up for my show every day. Click on the screen to subscribe.